So as vice chair, I'll just be hosting the meeting for us. It's a little bit simpler in-house. So good evening and welcome to our February 21st, 2024 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. Paper copies of the agenda are available for those who are here in person, and the full packet is available on our website as well. First, we will have our consent agenda, followed by general public comment. We welcome general public comment for addressing issues that are not on today's agenda, but are otherwise related to county business. Given our limited time and the need to have an orderly and efficient meeting, we apply certain rules regarding public comments. We will do our best to enforce these rules consistently and without regard to the, to the point of view expressed by the speaker. First, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we will accept public comment of any length in writing. Speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers, and all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And we also reserve the right to mute any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Please give your full name and address for our meeting minutes and address your comments to the Commission. Please also know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but we value your input. We don't, we don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot. But if you leave your contact information with county staff, we will try and get specific questions answered after the fact. After that, we will move on to our regular agenda. And for each action item, there will also be public comment after hearing from the staff and the applicant and questions from the Commission. Then once the item is open for public comment, it will be closed, and then we will bring the item back to the Commission for further discussion and a vote. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. And with that, we'll take a look at our consent agenda first. Looks like we just have a few items. Do either commissioner wish to pull anything off for more discussion?
No.
Oop, I muted myself. Does anybody in the public wish to pull anything from the consent agenda for further conversation or questions? Anybody online, Sarah?
No.
All right, with that, I will bring it back to the Commission for a motion.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. That passes, and so we'll move on to our general public comment. First, we'll start with folks who are in the building with us. Is there anybody here who would like to provide general public comment? See some folks standing up, so just a reminder, when you get up, there'll be a button on the microphone you can touch to see the green light, and then go ahead and give your name and Douglas County residence, and Sarah will be giving you some timekeeper reminders too, straight ahead of you. I'm not sure I said this before. For anybody who's online that might want to provide public comment, please plan to use the raise your hand function so staff know to move you over.
Good evening, commissioners. Wanda Haney and myself, Judy Pope, are longtime Douglas County residents, and we're also members of Justice Matters. We're here today to thank you for your part in addressing the issue of homelessness in our community. Justice Matters has been highlighting the importance of ending chronic homelessness for a long time, and we have stood before you many times urging you to take action. It is important now to come before you and acknowledge and thank you for the commitment you have made to implement Built for Zero model.
Members of the Justice Matters Committee attended the release of A Place for Everyone on January 17th. We are encouraged with how comprehensive the plan is, addressing both short-term and long-term goals, and that many of the key staff positions are in place. We also acknowledge that a plan of this size will take time to implement. That being said, we are reminded of the urgency for the plan to be in place. We have just come through another winter where our unhoused neighbors have been in crisis for survival. We urge the city and county to approve this plan and fund it completely. Lawrence and Douglas County has always been a special place. We have a chance to be a model to other communities, showing that loving and caring for the most vulnerable among us results in a better life, quality of life for us all. Again, we ask that the city and county approve and fund the plan as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you both. Have a nice evening. Is there anybody else here in the courtroom that would like to make public comment? Come on ahead.
It's after I'm done here. Good evening, Commissioners. Tim Horn, Southwest Douglas County and Unincorporated, Willow Springs trustee. I want to commend our Planning Commission on setting forth some very nice wind regulations, although I think there's some areas where we're lacking roads, things like that we need to address that should have been a topic of concern to make sure, and I know some of that may come later in time if a CUP is brought forth to us or whatever, but we need to make sure that the county and the township boards have a say on what roads are being used, how they are treated. They need to have dust control. Our bridges, we have several bridges that need to be acknowledged that would not handle the weights of some of this stuff, so we need to really think about that. We also need to think about rock. We got a certain amount of quarries in the area. The amount of concrete that they will put to each windmill will take a majority of the rock out of all of our quarries. And then we, in our township alone, we have 73 miles of rock road that we take care of. And with the winter we had this year, we've had a lot of sinkholes we had to address, get them fixed. Every one of our miles of road is going to need rock this year because it sank. And, we just got a lot of work to do. And we got to make sure we keep our roads safe for our community and for our citizens who live here day in, day out. And that's my biggest priority. And yet keep our costs down to where we don't have to, raise taxes again and everything. So that's what my biggest concern is. We need to make sure we look at that, and the county and the townships are part of that decision, because there's nobody that knows the roads any better than our township boards, our township crews, and our counties. So we need to make sure we let everybody join in on these decisions and stuff. So that's my thing tonight. I'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you for being here. Have a good rest of your night. Anybody else here in the room with us that would like to provide general public comment? All right, seeing no hands, double check for virtual hands. Okay, seeing none, we will close public comment and move on to our regular agenda. And our first item is our guests are the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce, and I'll let Jill go ahead and introduce this for us.
Commissioner, I provided a cover memo to accompany what we're going to discuss tonight, but this is a follow-up to discussions that occurred during the development of the 2024 budget related to an additional request for funding that the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce had submitted. The directive that was made to the chamber during budget deliberations, and that we, through some follow-up conversations that county administrators staff had with chamber staff, was that we'd have them, we'd move forward with the development of a service agreement for the base level of funding, which we are doing currently, but then additional conversation or additional information would be needed regarding details of the additional funding for $30,000, what that would look like, what kind of activities would be entailed. They provided that in the attachment that I provided you all. And I know that we have staff from the chamber here as well to maybe speak to those activities and answer any questions that you may have. And I can try to answer any questions you have as well.
Jill, I think I would, if neither commissioner has any immediate questions for Jill, I would like to have chamber representatives come up and provide a little bit of a presentation and further detail about the attachment we have in front of us. Commissioner Willie, do you have any questions top of mind for Jill first? Okay, go ahead. You don't need to sign that, Steve. But thank you for your due diligence. No.
I normally forget when I'm actually here, so I thought I would do that. Good evening, commissioners, and thank you for the opportunity to be here, and also thanks to Jill and the staff for the recommendation of approval. The chamber has been in this space for the last several years, and a lot of this work has come as a result of the findings of the Douglas County Health Plan, which identified significant health outcome disparities in different parts of the community. And in our involvement with some of the work that grew from that, the anti-poverty piece of that, there was a lot of interest that was identified, and I think a lot of findings that came that identified entrepreneurship as a way for us to provide opportunities to change some of that, change some of those health outcomes, and provide a better level of economic prosperity and a better opportunity for the future for people who were impacted by poverty, were impacted by racial bias, et cetera. So the chamber has become involved now for several years. It began with an effort through our Rising Together capital campaign to develop a revolving loan fund to support a low barrier minority loan revolving fund to support BIPOC and minority entrepreneurs. That also, from that, we learned that there were a number of other issues that we needed to address. That included additional education and training for entrepreneurs. We've done that with a couple of cohorts of classes that we have done called the Jump course that provides entrepreneurial basics for the folks who go through that. We also felt that there was a need for networking space and opportunities. We have been involved in some of those sessions. We were one of the co-sponsors of the EB3 conference last year, or the meetings that were here last year that were led by the county. And we've tried to continue to work. There are more folks in the space now than there were when we started. I think that's a great thing. We've worked a lot with Black 30. We continue to try to move the ball forward. And what we're here to present tonight is a set of additional funding opportunities or opportunities that we think will continue to enhance the entrepreneurial climate and support those minority entrepreneurs. I'm going to ask Josh Fawley, who's been leading the effort for us, to now speak about some of these individual pieces of it and answer any questions that we have.
Thank you all for having us today. You can see in the request for additional funds that we have here, Haskell Indian Nations University is one of those partners that that were engaged, but have really stepped up. Some terrific leadership and an extraordinary energy among the students, faculty, and staff. Have been granted a terrific SBA grant to help stand up a small business resource center / SBDC. And we want to be able to step in and provide some support for that, make sure people are aware in the community. There's a large Native population here in Lawrence as a result of Haskell's presence, but it's in addition to the Haskell community, not just because of. One of the things that we see our partners at Network Kansas are creating in response to feedback sessions, listening sessions that they continue to have is additional support for entrepreneurs for technical assistance, particularly legal, accounting, and some of those areas. We want to participate in that space as well and make sure that our entrepreneurs here have those resources available to them. Minority entrepreneur opportunity. There's a lot more events, as you've seen, as I'm sure you're aware, over the past year with wonderful Black business markets, minority business expos, pitch competitions. We don't want to see that kind of fall by the wayside. That creates a lot of energy and a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs. So we'd like to contribute to that as well. And then increasing access to our Spanish-speaking residents, our Spanish-speaking entrepreneurs. We just launched a couple of days ago on our EDC website a page talking and providing more information on Diversified Douglas County, our loan program. We want to make sure language is not a barrier to access those funds and those opportunities. So we'd like to make sure that we're meeting folks where they are. And then we'd like to contribute to bring E3 to a completion. You know, it was started last year about this time, and a lot of great work has been done since then, listening to BIPOC entrepreneurs and hearing what those needs are. And we think some of those impact videos and sharing that out with the public, if we can find ways to support that, that's what that last line item is there. So, any questions?
Commissioner Millie, I'll start with you online. Do you have any questions right now? Okay, I see a
yet.
head nod now. Okay. Commissioner Kelly, you have any questions? She said she did not. We were just talking at the same time, so.
So can you tell me a little bit more about the jump course and sort of who your participants are? Has that been a diverse group of participants?
It has been very diverse. Started in, I think, my first semester, I'm still talking in educational terms, was fall 2022. We had an entrepreneurial business basics course provided by Kira Cherie and her program, and there was a diverse group. Those with various experience, those with at various stages in their entrepreneurship journey. And the same was true in the spring of 2023, where we had another cohort, a second cohort, that provided fast track certification for each of those who completed the program.
And then my other question was around the technical assistance. The second item there, is this in addition to the grant? Like how do people know that this type of technical assistance is available?
Well, we're going to, for the Diversified Douglas County, we're following a bit of the Network Kansas model. Their grant assistance program is to provide additional support for those who have received Network Kansas program dollars. They might end up meeting some challenges, and this is kind of a complementary technical assistance to help to ensure their success along the way.
So only for those who receive the grants, not for those who are interested in applying for the grants.
Well, hopefully some of our additional programs, like our Small Business Resource Series, can provide some of those who haven't yet pursued there. But we want to make sure that the Diversified Douglas County loans that go out have a lot of support around them, in addition to their ongoing relationship with SBDC, expertise that helps them get to where they are and some of the challenges that they might face along the way. We don't want to give them startup dollars through Diversified Douglas County and watch them kind of not have additional resources that they might need.
Thanks.
Can you give me some understanding about how you arrived at these numbers and the breakdown? So for example, like the one of these that I appreciate the most and am happy to see here is that technical assistance, the idea that there are funds to help pay for lawyers, licensing, things like that, that might be the only barrier. It seems to me 5,000 is a little small for that, but I just want to understand kind of with all of these numbers how you generated that and that breakdown.
Well, I would say that, some of our partnerships with Network Kansas have been complementary, but also unique. I think in our conversation with Diversified Douglas County, we had some of those conversations about how Diversified Douglas County was modeled after Network Kansas's Empower programs. They also have statewide technical assistance grants that they're making available at this time. because it's a new program, those are sort of limited in funding for a statewide program. We wanted to complement that. So I think it is maybe a little small to your point, but hopefully at the moment, it's complementary to what they're doing. And so we have a lot of folks participating in that.
You mentioned maybe some limited funds from Network Kansas specific to technical assistance to be spread out by the state. Are you even eligible to get those funds since you're not in Empower? Since you modeled the DDC after their program, but you're not part of their program. So I assume that means that you're not eligible for those technical assistance dollars, however small they may be in that pool. And therefore you're trying to create the same thing, but with a different source.
In conversations with our regional coach, Ms. Jen Laird, she has always seen and she articulates it and communicates things as while we're doing it on our own in our own dollars, and we'd like to create something that's more responsive to our immediate needs. She does think of, and Network Kansas has thought of our DDC program as one of its own. She's participated in a lot of those conversations, meetings, and the creation of it, and has assured us of support along the way.
Yeah, we've not been given any indication that entrepreneurs here would not be able to access the Network Kansas funds. It's just right now.
Technical assistance.
The
grant
technical
funds.
assistance, yes. It's just right now, they're rolling the program out and there's, an unknown amount of demand, but it has come up time and time again in conversations with the Network Kansas teams and others that this is a critical piece and something that they feel is very important to add. And we thought it would be helpful for us to actually have some sort of a component to provide technical assistance.
I just wanted to add one more thing to Commissioner Kelly's question earlier about DDC represented. Some of the programs, additional programs that Network Kansas have participated in include the EBB jump course, and participants in that course too are eligible for some of those technical assistance funds as well. So it's not exclusively through their loan programs, it's also through a lot of their programming. And we hope to make this as available as well.
And will you have you modeled or built out a framework for what the sort of application or screening process is for that? Who's responsible for it? You've talked a lot about modeling after this Network Kansas program, so I sort of assume there might be a bit of a blueprint for you, but I'm just curious, like nuts and bolts, what that looks like, because it's another layer of a new program to add onto a newish program.
Yeah, those continue to unfold and make sure that they're responsive, but it's similar to the I guess the dynamics that we operated when we offered the Empower pitch competition last summer, where those who were interested could apply and submit invoices for the technical assistance that they've sought out. Whether it's an attorney or accounting advice, and then those invoices up to a certain amount could be supported. Network Kansas has a maximum at the moment of $1,000 maximum, so it could supplement or help if there's additional things. So it's supportive at the moment, and so modeling it after a similar sort of structure would be what we do. So we participate in those conversations as we kind of fed that way.
Do you have something to add, Steve?
I was just going to add that we have been meeting, our FRB has been meeting with Jen Laird of Network Kansas on a monthly basis. And that's where a lot of these conversations are taking place as they're continuing to move forward with their program. We've been involved in those discussions so we can see how they're doing it and learn from what their experience is as they move along.
I'm going to move above that one. The Haskell Business Center, can you just help me know. So the document you gave us is quite thin. I'm just going to acknowledge that. There's not a lot of detail. So I have some detailed questions to understand where the conversations were born out of, because what I remember the sort of charge and direction from the commission being was that we wanted to see projects that highlighted collaboration that was occurring and any either new projects or enhancement of projects that were ongoing born out of the E3 process and the group of people working on that. So to that end, I'm curious about the Haskell Business Center, if they came to the chamber with a request for some support on stand-up dollars, where did that line come from?
That line comes from ongoing conversations with folks from the School of Business at Haskell. As you might know, we have a regular seat for representation from Haskell Indian Nations University at our Board of Directors meetings, and we're thrilled to have them as a part of that, continuing since last year. And so when they received this SBA grant, we recognized that some of those funds might be limited in terms of promotion or marketing or getting the word out about their successes. And so this line was created to help them do that.
Okay, follow-up question, and I don't know if this might be best for you, Steve, well, whoever wants to answer it can answer it. Well, is the Haskell Business Center a member of the Chamber of Lawrence at this point? Do you know? I mean, chamber members are everything from business owners to nonprofit organizations to offices. So I'm just curious if you know that. And the reason I'm asking is because I wonder what sort of promotional benefits come along with a chamber membership that might include some of these things that you're talking about specifically.
At the moment, I'm not sure whether they are a full member at this point. Okay, my boss knows. So they are a member. And as far as promotional opportunities that come, they would have opportunities to be part of ribbon cuttings. We have monthly gatherings. They would be in our newsletter chain. They would receive our social media information. So there are a number of things there that can be used to leverage and provide additional support. I think what Josh is talking about primarily is I think they have some limitations on what they can do in terms of hosting and events and those sorts of things, which we thought would be something that we could help with and maybe give them some additional exposure in the community and among that population as well.
Okay, thanks. But I think what I'm hearing is there was not necessarily an explicit request made or presented to the chamber. It's just more of perhaps an organic conversation that's happening with some chamber board representation from Haskell talking about ideas and possibilities. Is that accurate?
I think that would be accurate, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so about the minority entrepreneur opportunity, the events, you listed some of those here. That's the biggest share of the money. So I kind of, again, want to understand like where that calculation came from. And I would, in this instance in particular, want to understand what the conversation has been like with all those other partners. Some of them you mentioned during your presentation and comments earlier, but other entities like Black 30 or CORE have hosted many of those events. And some of them were the first time events, some of them have been going on for a couple of years. So I just want to understand what the collaborative conversation was and the awareness of other partners and or requests that were made of other partners to the chamber for that type of support.
I think the beginning, the starting point for me was seeing the success, the excitement, and the energy around the Empower pitch competition last summer. Through Network Kansas and some of their programming dollars, Manhattan, Topeka, Lawrence, and Kansas City were able to host the pitch competitions were $5,000 per for the top three. Were able to win that level of award. So that's at least where we started. But then we thought through conversations that we've had with Black 30, with CORE, now with Haskell, they're hosting, I believe, a pitch competition right now that I'm unfortunately missing, but very happy to be here. Those conversations about, can the chamber support? Can we help out? We certainly want to be supportive to the best we can. So sometimes that might be us taking a lead. Sometimes it might be a back seat. So we want to be able to engage and promote with our partners and support in ways that are going to best amplify the BIPOC entrepreneurs that we're celebrating, that we're highlighting, and that are doing business in our community.
Were you asked by any of those event organizers or organizations to have some dedicated funds? Because what you're asking us for is a $30,000 supplemental request to bring your funding, your annual funding from us, your baseline funding up to what it once was, maybe a little more if I don't have all those numbers in front of me, forgive me. But so I'm trying to think about this long-term too, right? You're detailing these 5 things that you think the $30,000 could and should be allocated to for this fiscal year, 2024. I'm trying to get a handle on our partners that you work with aware that you have asked, or you're asking for some dedicated funds to help promote or host those events. I mean, a significant chunk of money that theoretically could be available every year, but I also don't know if the thought is that you might change how these dollars are allocated, say next year or 2 years down the road, which is your prerogative. Every community partner can come to us with updated, modified requests, right? But does that make sense? I'm just trying to get a handle on, like, were you asked by any of those organizers or events for some like consistent, dedicated financial support?
Yes, Commissioner, we've been asked on a number of occasions to support specific items, different events and that sort of thing, and have tried to work through a process so they aren't just random. So having some dedicated funding for that purpose would be helpful. And then we could establish perhaps a budget for a period of time for a particular organization so they'd have a better handle on what their potential ask could be from us, from those funds, because right now it's kind of catch as catch can, and they just come, sometimes without a lot of warning, and there's a need or a desire, and we certainly try to and want to be able to be supportive, but having a dedicated fund would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. And then I think, well, I'm going to ask a question of Jill on this one. Jill, can you give us, as the commission, a kind of a recap of the funding of E3 project to date? Sort of where has the funding come from, and what have we funded thus far? And if you can articulate kind of what's left to fund that's in progress, that would be helpful for me.
Yes, give me just a second. I have that in a handy dandy email back and forth with, historically, let's see, the county has, so you go back to the county's ARPA grant process. We put in a project, a funding request for $35,000 for, excuse me, I think it was $40,000. Just know this probably, it's in 35. Thank you. The ARPA update is at the end of today's meeting. Thank you. Brooke is clutch, as she always is. To fund an engagement with Forward Cities to do the E3 event. Because we put together we put together the engagement to have Forward Cities come with that project funding. Because part of that engagement is that you have sponsors that are with you at the table. So we had Network Kansas, we had the Lawrence Chamber, we had the Community Foundation all provide funding for that. And at the end of the day, we had some funding that was left over to implement the recommendations that would come out of the E3 sessions. So at the end of the day, we had about $7,000 that was left over. We took that $7,000, and it was utilized in a couple ways. We provided some funding to fulfill a sponsorship request to a couple of Black 30s events, but then the balance of those dollars were utilized to provide gift cards and for the 2 BIPOC listening session. Well, we had 1 BIPOC listening session that was earlier this year that was hosted by the E3, or the Entrepreneur Listening Project, that we have Nicole Riles here who leads that project, and she can speak specifically to the work that that project has done and her leadership to it. But we provided stipends for the folks that participated in those 2 listening sessions, one that was hosted by Black 30 and another one that was also hosted in coordination with Black 30, but at La Estrella. And then we provided funding to support the videography that was done to do one-on-one interviews with the entrepreneurs that attended those sessions, and just the services that they provided. So those were how the county's funds were used. In addition to that, Network Kansas brought to bear $7,500 to provide stipends to compensate the leadership team of the Entrepreneur Listening Project, the folks that were leading that work. And then I was approached by, well, you all heard when we provided an update for Network on the E3 activities back in November, early November. Nicole and the team presented where the progress to date, and she indicated that there's more work to be done and there's going to be more expenses. So they outlined that, and a request was submitted. We had expected around $9,000 in additional expenses to finish out the E3 project, and a small amount of money to make whole Black 30 for some of the expenses that they absorbed to do headshots for some of the entrepreneurs that came to that event. It came to about $9,000. So the City of Lawrence and the Chamber was approached to see if they could help us fund that gap. Happy to report that the City of Lawrence has committed just over $4,000 for that, and I've invoiced them for that. And so the balance is what you see in that amount that's outlined to complete the E3 project. Sorry, that's a really long, windy, but that's our funding for specific to the E3 activities. And then beyond that, it's staff time on my part for supporting the entrepreneurship community.
Which is invaluable, by the way, or hard to calculate, I should say. Thank you for that. That is helpful. So to piggyback off that, it sounds like both the City of Lawrence and the Lawrence Chamber were approached simultaneously about kind of closing the gap to finish that project. Is that accurate? And that's where this 45-25 number was born out of? Okay, that's helpful to understand. Okay, those are all my questions for right now.
I have a follow-up question. So as you think ahead and these dollars come in, have you talked about what kind of metrics you're keeping to determine whether these efforts are successful, or if it's not enough money, as Commissioner Reed says, like that seems like a low amount, how you would come back to us with a different request or maybe moving around those dollars in a certain way? Have you thought about that at all? And if so, what did you decide?
That's something that's still under development, but I think, with some of this work, it's really about making the connections. So if we are supporting events, who is attending those events? What kind of interactions are they having? We could do something along those lines from a count standpoint and what the networking is provided. On the technical assistance, I think that's fairly easy to measure. You'd identify the funding and who has received the funding for what services. Have you supported 5 entrepreneurs, 10 entrepreneurs with technical assistance? And then I think on the event side, again, I think that's one where you would do some sort of measurement of the impacts. If it's money that's contributed or part of a pitch competition, say, for instance, You could identify the capital that was provided to the entrepreneurs for their endeavor. If it's, some sort of an event where we're basically supporting the event, again, I think it would be a measurement of the involvement and who the attendees were. That touches on several. And then I think the Spanish translation, I think that kind of speaks for itself. We have a significant number of business people and potential business people in the community. And I attended the La Estrella event, and it was very shocking to me to be in a room where no one spoke English. And so I have a much greater appreciation for what it means to be in a situation where you are either from a reading standpoint or from a speech standpoint really put at a disadvantage. And so I think that is a really valuable service to provide.
Yeah, just I like a lot of those things you said there, Steve, about keeping track of who participates. I want to encourage you, since this is all about diversity, and to make sure that we're keeping track of the different demographics that are showing up. And I think that was implied, but I didn't hear it said. And then also encouraging some listening, since a lot of this is new space for the chamber. Some of it is building on what you've done before. If we approve this, really listening to those who you're serving and saying, how can we get better at this? What's the next thing that we need to do? What did we miss? What did we not see in a very vulnerable place to say, how can we make it better? How can we continue to partner across the community? So just as you're thinking about how to measure that and how to come back to us and say, this really worked, or this didn't work, and here's why it didn't work, I'd encourage you to really flesh that out.
That is the right process to use. It's what do they need?
Commissioner Willie, I'm going to turn back to you. Any questions bubbled up for you?
I really appreciate the detail that my two fellow commissioners have kind of ferreted out for this. We didn't get a lot of detail in the actual packet. I'm pretty pleased with the breadth of partnerships that this represents. And I think that in addition to metrics, which are very important, and our commission stresses that, I think what we'll get out of this would be stories. And I'm excited to kind of hear some of those stories and find out where those areas of strength are, and identify some areas of weakness in our community, not just with the chamber, of ways that we can move forward in supporting entrepreneurs. So I'm pleased with the proposal.
Thank you. I do have one last question, and I'll open it up for public comment. So with the Spanish language accessibility, you say to DDC, the Diversify Douglas County Revolving Loan Fund, and other. Can you expand on what other is? And then also, similar to my questions earlier, where did that price come from? Have you been able to sort of do some cost estimates about materials or contract fees for translators or things like that? Just help me understand a little bit more where you came from. And have you considered using any of the current DDC funds that are unallocated to jumpstart that? Like, if we didn't fund you today for any reason, would that prohibit you from moving forward on? I mean, that question really applies to any of these, but I do think language access is really important in those loan documents and in that program in particular. So just want to understand more about where you're at with that.
Yeah, so for the other is leaving open the opportunity, not just for our DDC materials and applications for those DDC loans, but also the technical assistance and other opportunities. I don't want to have an application for, and materials, conversation or frequently asked questions in Spanish, and then not have that also for the technical assistance availability and opportunities. 5,000 is an estimate. We do have we have a number of partners in these programs, some of whom may already have built into their organizations some Spanish-speaking opportunities that they might be willing to confer. But we also want to make sure that if we have to go outside, contact somebody, somebody with bilingual expertise, we want to make sure that we're able to compensate them appropriately for that. And so 5,000 at the moment is an estimate based on what we might find needs translations or needs one-on-one conversations, or in our process, we do have with our financial review board a conversation about applications that come in through Diversified Douglas County. We want to make sure that we have somebody who can translate and communicate back and forth so that that's a good and easy, smooth process. We want to make sure that they're compensated appropriately as well. And so that might change and modify going forward. But I've been excited about all the entrepreneurial partners that have burgeoned up and grown and developed over the past year. And so I hope that will continue, and others will continue to step into that space and support in a number of ways.
If you all did not receive this funding from us, are all of these still priorities for the chamber that you would try to work towards? I obviously know without the funding from us, you may not be able to fund all of these, but I'm just curious if part of your conversation has been about, are any of these things such a priority that you will look to fund them anyway and to move forward with them because they have value?
Absolutely. These are critical pieces that we need to find ways of creating greater accessibility, greater support for entrepreneurs. If this was not funded today, I would have a lot of work to do tomorrow and the next day and going forward to find ways of making these resources available to those entrepreneurs.
All right, thank you. Bonnie, go ahead.
Great job by my colleagues. Thank you so much. I'm Bonnie Lowe with the Chamber. I appreciate the question, Commissioner Reed. We try to stretch all the funds as much as we can, and so that we would have to determine what we may not be able to do with existing funding to do this work. And so it'd be a little bit of a shell game. It's all important. So how we make those dollars work, we'd really have to come back and look at what our finances look like. So I hate to say that all of this would be funded, because that's $30,000 from something that we're existing services that we're doing that may not be able to be funded. So we do our best. There's a lot of this is time and our desire and our love for this work to help this population. So we'd certainly do our best, but it comes down to funding what other $30,000 we can't fund because of that. So
Understood.
to be perfectly
And
honest.
I know that's
and
not an easy
transparent.
question. I just want to I think it's an important one because whenever making a supplemental funding request of an entity, a contingency plan for not receiving the funds is part of that conversation naturally, at least I would expect it to be. So I just wanted to, and I know I'm putting you on the spot a little bit with that question, and I certainly wouldn't expect you to be able to fund all of these if you weren't awarded $30,000 from us. I just kind of wanted to understand, to me, like the two DDC related, even though it's not exclusively DDC, as Josh has sort of laid out with answers to our questions, those priorities, I wonder if to me, they're top priorities. I will say that in terms of like the access and the direct assistance that it provides to entrepreneurs. So I just sort of wanted to suss out whether or not that was conversation that you had and if there were other funding options for those things in particular, since there is a pool of money for the DDC in existence currently.
It is. I think it's an excellent question. I just want to be 100% transparent, let you know what we're thinking. I did want to point out the DDC funds, 100% of that and the interest earned on the funds that is sitting in a local financial institution is going for loans. There's nothing built into that program currently to help the people developing this project. 100% is going to the loans, which is we're pretty proud of.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
Can I get some clarification on the E3 number? That appears to be one-time funds. Is that it's for the completion of the project, so that would not be a part of the request in 2025, or is it, so that would be one time?
Yeah, that was the number given that would complete it, and in combination with the city's funding, that would be not included in 2025.
Okay, so the ongoing request would be for $30,000 minus $45,25. Okay.
To that end, I would say the $3,000 committed to the Haskell Business Center stand up, it is also really a one-time or a temporary cost. So that is part of the question, that's part of what I'm struggling with. And we do need to open it up for public comment and we can have more discussion, but to Sarah's question and point, I'm trying to think about how this translates to, because this is not a one-time funding request, it is a supplemental budget request as part of our normal annual review project. We sort of put a pause on it back in July of last year and are revisiting it now. That's 6 months before we start our next budget year process. So assuming that this $30,000 would be included in this year's or next year's budget proposal, which of these things are included it's part of the equation that I'm sort of trying to suss out.
Well, and I think that's a logical and a reasonable question. I think what we would hope, if those are viewed as one-time funding, that we would have the opportunity to come back and maybe with some experience that we've learned in the interim, we'd be able to approach you and say, this is what we've learned. Here's something that we missed and would be helpful to the entrepreneurial community, and have the chance to, if those are chosen to be removed from the funding, have an opportunity to come back and talk about what we've learned or where we think that we're short in terms of the funding that we had asked for before, and then approach you from that standpoint.
Got it. Okay, did that raise any other? Yep, go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
And I was happy to save this till after public comment if that's more appropriate. I did want to just talk a little bit about the idea of baseline funding, which that is an idea I think I'm less tied to than perhaps others. I think every year we might have a starting point of that conversation, but all of those dollars are none of those dollars are guaranteed. I think it's all part of the conversation. So I'm not at all bothered by the proposal for the $30,000. I don't anticipate that it will be allocated this way year to year to year. Not only that, I don't feel like we are ever committing funds year to year to year. That's just why we have our annual budget process the way we do. So in terms of the level of detail, those I don't anticipate to be ongoing at those funding levels. I think this $30,000, this is a great proposal for how to use these this year and bring those stories back and kind of, have that new discussion about, is this how the county wants to help fund some of these organizations is through the chamber, and what did we gain from that? And I think those will be great discussions to have and great stories to bring back. But I think because I'm not as tied to that this is baseline ongoing, these are budget items, I'm not as worried about exactly where those pieces go and if they'll be asked for next year.
And I guess I just want to be clear for the chamber to know what they need to do as a part of the budget process. So if what I'm hearing for that is that every year they would complete a budget process that would outline how the $30,000 for entrepreneurial support would be spent in that upcoming calendar year. Would that work? Or do I just need some direction as to what do I need to build into the budget for my proposed budget?
I appreciate that. We haven't really had a lot of conversation about our 2025 budget yet. And if you look at our 2024 baseline that was approved for this year, $30,000 to the side and also DDC funding aside, it talks about entrepreneurial support, and it does not have this level of detail. So if that's what the commission wants something to, going forward, we can certainly do that, but we haven't had a lot of conversation about next year. I like what Commissioner Willie's proposing, but we want a good partner, be good partners with you. I think we have been, and we want to continue so. So we just haven't had a lot of that conversation for 2025.
No, and I think
yet.
that's fine, but
Okay.
For me, I'm a month away from budget starting, so I'm already thinking in that mode. So I just think it's going to be one of those things that we need to be thinking of as we approach the process as to what what you would be submitting for. And that's sort of what I'm hearing, is that there'd be, and as we're trying to do with community partners, a higher level of detail with what the scope of services would be. So there would be a scope of services provided for 2025 related to entrepreneurial support.
I was going to make some comments after public comment about it, but since we're going down this road, I think first we have to recognize that this isn't typically the way that we do budget, right? This is sort of a unique situation where we we gave them a real specific focus and said, this is where we want those dollars to be. So I think it's a good conversation for the commission to have moving forward, because, as they do their budget process, they need to come to us and know, is this one-time funds? Is this, and I think we owe it to them to be real clear. Are you asking for one-time funds? Are you asking for ongoing funding? I don't remember any discussion we had when we asked them to bring something back to us that said, delineate, I see what you're trying to do there, Sarah, because you're thinking about budget, but I think that's something for us to continually talk about is, how do we work with our community partners and to make sure they're clear on that. And that's just a longer conversation, not just about this one, but if we're going to do this again where we get a supplemental request and then we send it back to them and say, we want you to come back at another meeting. I understand why we did it. I'm not sure it's bad, but I think we've got to flesh out that process a little clearer.
That's fair. I appreciate that. Okay, with that, I've got all of my questions out of my system and some of my comments too, maybe a little premature. But with that, I'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Is there anybody in the room with us that would like to offer public comment about this item? Going once, going twice. Any virtual hands? Okay, we'll close public comment and bring this back for a little bit of continued discussion. I think I am hopeful about what is possible. I will say that the part that I'm pausing on the most is honestly the E3 project, which is not because I don't support it. I love that project and want to see it through through to the end. And also, it's really our funds helping finish funding it. And so I'm a little stuck on that piece, but I just need to sort of say that out loud and say my piece about it, because the county invested a lot of money and dollars into that project, and it's been worthwhile. And I have also hoped for more financial support and participation from other partners along the way that hasn't been there. And so I'm struggling with that piece a little bit, but otherwise I feel hopeful about what is possible with some of these plans laid out and think that they are all heading in the right direction, and am hopeful that in this coming year that it will be more evident that there's some real growth and collaborations and positive relationships amongst partners who are truly working together towards these goals, sort of with a shared vision, on the same path, and figuring out what their expertise and their skill set lies in to help enhance access to entrepreneurship and knowledge about all the resources in our community that are available to entrepreneurs, and what it looks like for county governments and city municipalities to support that and the value that it brings to our community, in addition to some of the more traditional economic development that is often talked about in terms of increasing tax base with, industrial development or growth of cities, those sorts of things. This is an important, very valuable piece of economic growth too. And I want to see it continue to grow because it's reaching far more people in the community, people who work here, live here, choose to raise their families here, and choose to start and grow their businesses here. And they bring a lot of value in their products and services and contributions to the community. And so I'm hoping that we continue to have a spotlight on that, because I do think it has significant value in our community. And I think that these efforts can and hopefully will go a long way towards that. So I look forward to sort of hearing a report back and seeing how it evolves in this next budget process and beyond. Any comments from you, Commissioner Rowley? I would defer to you on the video first.
No, I'm pretty happy with moving forward with it. My only concern is in the motion, the word ongoing, because I think when we approve supplemental requests, we approve supplemental requests. We don't necessarily flag whether those are going to be funded the next year or not. I think by default, it falls under our baseline funding because baseline funding is whatever they got the year before, and so it would be part of the 2024 dollars that were allocated. But that's my only issue, is just locking us in with a word there. But otherwise, I'm happy to make a motion whenever you are ready.
Just a couple of comments. First, I want to say that anytime we challenge the status quo, we should expect some uncertainty and conflict. There is some uncertainty in this plan, and admittedly so, and that's fine. That's okay. I think one of the things the commission tried to do was sort of upset the status quo, and we did so with our budgeting process. We did so by asking our exclusive economic development partner to maybe think about and do things a little differently, to maybe reach out and collaborate with a group a little differently than they have before. And I think anytime we do that, there's going to be that conflict, that uncertainty. I'm not sure how to do this. And so I think we have to make space for that and allow for that. And I think it goes as the chamber as we've done that, I've actually, and I want to publicly appreciate a stronger attention to some of the details that we've been asking for. You know, in the EDC report, we had a nice report just this past week on, you know, what sites we're actually looking for industrial development. Those are some of the things that we've been asking for, and I would expect as we go into the next round of budget, our partners at the chamber would say, hey, they keep asking for these things. We need to provide a little more detail and a little more detail and a little more detail. Because as you can tell from this meeting, we're going to dig into the detail. If we don't get it, we're going to ask for it. That's just a learning process over time. So, and I think that goes as well for our community partners and Black 30 and CORE and some of these great groups that are doing really important things out there, is to continue to see if we can work as an economic development system. How we collaborate together may be a little bumpy and a little uncomfortable, but I do think there's space to work together on that. As far as the ongoing funding, I would say to commissioners, what I don't want to create is sort of we do have a one-time funding and an ongoing. I would recommend we do this as ongoing funding and challenge the chamber to bring us back that plan, to include that in your budget request for next year, and be specific on these type of entrepreneurial, you know, diverse voice efforts that we've asked for in that plan. If we decide not to fund it, as Commissioner Willie says, we can cut it by 10,000. We can cut it all if we want. I'm not saying we're going to do that, but I think that's the process. I get a little nervous about what has become sort of a secondary budget request, and I don't really want to make that a habit for us, but I understand why we did that this time. I think we've learned a lot from that process. So that's what I'd offer to commissioners if they're fine with that, and check in with Sarah to say it's in the motion is ongoing, and we'd ask them to bring back a plan of how they're going to spend that 30,000. And maybe as we get more and more detail, we can sort of ease off of that a little more.
I appreciate that point, Commissioner Kelly, and I think, oh, sorry, Commissioner Willie, I was just going to say, I do think that I appreciate your point, Commissioner Willie, but ongoing funding sort of in this, the motion language and how our budget process works, it doesn't equal guaranteed funding, right? And so ongoing suggests that we expect to keep receiving requests similar to the amount and the ways they plan to use that amount sort of year after year, but whether or not the commission approves of that is not a foregone conclusion, so.
I'm all on board with what my two commissioners have shared. I definitely want them to come back with a proposal similar, not exactly the same, but similar, kind of learning from lessons from this funding, though we can never really guarantee anything until budget time. So yeah, I'm very happy. I would make a motion if you're ready.
Go for it.
All right. I move to approve the supplemental ongoing funding of $30,000 for the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce for fiscal year 2024.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll move on to agenda item 3.2. Looks like you're going to hear about emergency communications. I'll just let you take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Commissioners. Before you is a final agreement between the cities of Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin City and Douglas County related to the financial sustainability and governance of our Emergency Communications Center. As Commissioners know, in late 2022, Douglas County began work with Wichita State University's Public Policy Management Center to review the agreement and revise the funding formula. That final report and presentation were made to all 4 of those bodies in May of last year, and then all 4 governing bodies agreed to the funding formula, included it in their 24 operating budgets. It's taken us a little bit of time to get the agreement together, but it is before you tonight. My understanding is the cities of Lawrence and Baldwin City approved it last night, and then it will be on the next regular meeting for the city of Eudora, which is on the 26th. And we have our friends from Emergency Communication Center and Emergency Management here available for any questions.
Great, thanks, Sarah. I don't have any questions about this. Commissioner Kelly?
No questions from me.
Commissioner Willie?
I have a quick question, and I think I know the answer, but Sarah, if you would just kind of double check with me. The city of Lecompton, because the county provides their first responder for law enforcement, that's why they're not needing to approve this document. Would that be correct?
Correct. Yeah, they've not historically been a partner to this because we have worked with agencies with independent law enforcement offices.
Thank you.
Okay, with no further questions from the commission, we'll open this up for public comment. Anybody here want to make a public comment about this item? Seeing no takers, how about online? All right, close public comment and bring this back for any further comments or motion.
I'm happy to make a motion, but first I want to tell Sarah and Tony and all that I really like reading these reports that sort of understand the background and compare it to what other communities are doing. I think especially in these collaborative agreements that we have, in some ways we're outside the norm on some of these, and it's really interesting to read, to have Wichita State in both cases. It was the same with Lawrence Douglas County Fire and Medical, to sort of analyze that for us. I think that's a really good process, and I think, Sarah, that was your idea early on, and I just want to say how much I appreciate it. I appreciate reading those reports. If you're an emergency management or emergency communications geek, I really suggest you read that report because it's quite fascinating.
I really appreciate that, Commissioner Kelly. And it's a great opportunity to say this because we also have our friends at Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical here. It takes a special type of leader to be comfortable working as collaboratively as we do here in Douglas County. Consolidated dispatch is not the norm. And I just really always want to take an opportunity to applaud Tony and the work that his team does. And they really are a leader in the state. And it's just, and his approach to this process was never one of fear or turf. And I took a lot of conversations with a lot of different folks, and I'm really proud that we're in such a positive place for it.
And I want to be clear, 5 years ago, I never would have said I was an emergency management or emergency communications geek. That is an evolution over time, but really appreciate the work that went into this.
Definitely one of the coolest things that counties do in general, and we do it pretty well here.
We do
Okay.
have awesome dispatch.
Yes,
I get to work
indeed.
with them a lot.
Commissioner Willie, would you like to make a motion? You're unmuted. Well, you were.
Sure, I said to get back to it. I move to authorize the county administrator to sign an interlocal agreement with the cities of Lawrence, Eudora, and Baldwin City for the financial and governing structure of the Emergency Communications Center.
Again, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you all for being here and for your work and patience. All right, with that, we'll move on to item 3.3, and we have our friends from LDC-FM to come give us a presentation. Sarah, do you want to do any introduction, or we just turn it over to Chief
You know,
Llewellyn?
Chief Llewellyn really needs no introduction. So just pleased to have our friends from LDCFM here to talk to us again about the importance of Pulse Point.
Yeah, happy to see everybody here tonight and happy to visit. I do have a presentation for you, and do I need to share my screen?
Yeah, you need to share your screen.
Someone talk me through that on
Hey,
Zoom.
Eric.
We're getting there.
All right, it was the big green button that was right in front of me. So, good evening, Rich Llewellyn. I'm the fire chief for Lawrence Douglas County Fire Medical. Happy to appear before you tonight. I have with me Division Chief Kevin Joels, who's our Division Chief of Emergency Medical Services. We're here to talk about Pulse Point and cardiac arrest survivability in Douglas County. Excited to speak on this subject, and I'm knowledgeable in it, but Chief Joels is, I would say, a nationally recognized expert in cardiac arrest survivability. So he's available for any of the tough questions, and I'll handle the ones that don't appear as tough. So with that, we'll move on to the presentation. Want to talk about where Pulse Point is at today, and I think in order to do that, it's really important to talk about where Pulse Point started. And it started in California in San Ramon Valley in 2009. A friend of mine named Rich Price was the fire chief in San Ramon Valley at that time. San Ramon Valley is just across the Oakland Hills from the San Francisco Bay Area, and that location is going to play a part in the story that I'll get to in a second. Chief Price was at lunch one day inside his own fire district. It's a decent sized fire district and spread out. You don't see a radio on me. You don't see a radio on Chief Joels. When we get to the executive level, we don't typically carry radios and don't typically listen to radios all day long because it's really not our role anymore. Similarly, Rich Price did not have a radio on him, but he did hear a siren pull up in the same parking lot that he was in. Unfortunately, someone a couple doors down had experienced a cardiac arrest, and when he heard the siren, he went out, he saw his crew, went over and saw what was going on and provided what help he could. But that really started him thinking about what could he have done had he known that there was a cardiac arrest going on. He could have gone over, he could have started CPR, he could have used a public access AED and applied an AED to the patient. That's an automated external defibrillator. For those who don't know the acronyms, I'll try to, the fire service is full of acronyms, so I'll try to slow down and get through those. And he just started to think about how could we do things better. San Ramon Valley, I mentioned, is just across the hills from San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. They're a very tech-savvy agency. Their website is at firedepartment.org. They recognize that this internet thing wasn't a fad and got on board early. He tried to think about what you could use to notify folks, and everybody has a cell phone. And that's the route he went down. So he worked with web developers, worked with app developers, created an app called Pulse Point. And it's Pulse Point Respond. We'll get into a couple of the little different variations, but created the Pulse Point Respond app in order to crowdsource the provision of CPR. And by crowdsource, I mean, if somebody has a cardiac arrest, let's get folks to that person who know how to do CPR. It's focused in public places, and we'll talk about what happens in private spaces. But if somebody has a cardiac arrest in a public place, we're going to get notification. Folks are going to get notification here in Douglas County if they're within a quarter mile of that location. So if somebody has a cardiac arrest across the street, across Mass from here, my phone would go off, Chief Joel's phone would go off, and we'd know that somebody needed CPR across the street, and you'd probably see us leave, and we'd have to do this some other time. But that's the idea, is to let folks know that somebody needs CPR. And as as Chief Price said, when he first talked about Pulse Point and talked about dispatching, if you will, in air quotes, civilians to cardiac arrest events, folks thought he was a little bit crazy because that wasn't something that happened. But he forged ahead and got the app developed and got it out there, and it started to pick up some steam. I've seen a lot of instances where people have responded to cardiac arrest events because they got notice or notification through Pulse Point. So it has had some success. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about some of the variations in the evolution of Pulse Point as we go. Why is it important that we care about this? What does it mean to us? Nationwide, there's approximately 1,000 instances of sudden cardiac arrest every day. There are 1,000 people who need CPR every day from a sudden cardiac arrest, not counting a traumatic arrest, which is a little bit different. These are typically medically related. Here in Douglas County, and Chief Joles will correct me if my math is wrong, we respond to approximately 20 a month of cardiac arrest events. And it's important for us that we give folks a chance to live longer. I've had, there's always the good stories where somebody comes and says, hey, thank you, you saved me. I was able to go to my kid's graduation, able to see my grandkids. Those are important stories, and those are the ones that really drive a lot of us to do what we do. You can see the CPR timeline on the right side of the screen. There's a recent study I read that talked about the likelihood of surviving a cardiac arrest without any brain damage decreases by 7 to 10% for every minute that CPR is not applied. So you can see by the time you hit 10 minutes, you're in the range of 70 to 100% likelihood that you're not going to survive without some kind of deficit. Our objective is to get folks back into their life with no deficit. Just, it was an event that happened in their life. They're on to living a normal life after that occurs and after they survive. If we could have a firefighter on every corner, every street corner, somebody trained in CPR on every street corner who could be dispatched, that'd be great. We'd have folks giving CPR within a couple minutes, any time of the day or night, but communities can't afford that. That's not realistic. What we try to do is we try to get folks out there who have that training, who are able to be dispatched or able to get that notification that a CPR is needed and get them there. So that's the approach that we're taking. We have up here some of the language that we use to talk about our performance within the city's strategic plan. I'll let Chief Joles take this.
So this measure is an ICMA measure. It essentially is telling us what we're looking at here is a 20.3% ROSC score, which is return of spontaneous circulation, which means that we're delivering the patient to the hospital with a pulse. And so you'll notice that our greater than or equal to 60% is our target, and we're considerably less than that. One of the reasons that is this is the Utstein criteria, and Utstein criteria measures three things. It's the witness, so essentially somebody collapses in front of you, which would be the witness part. Bystander CPR, so that witness or somebody immediately available to perform CPR. And then that person is in a shockable rhythm. So that means that heart rhythm that they're in isn't what we would typically see on TV or entertainment. Medical entertainment would be a flat line or something like that. It'd be asystolic, would be a shockable rhythm. And those are very rare occurrences. We only maybe see that about 3 to 4% in our data across the board. We typically measure in all comers data, but for this ICMA measure, we're using the Utstein data, which is 20.3%. And the reason why that is because our bystander CPR is pretty low in the community, and so we're working towards some initiatives to increase that. Obviously, Pulse Point is one of them. What are you doing here? So the CARES registry is the Cardiac Arrest Registry for Enhanced Survival, which is a registry within the United States that not every agency is required to. There's no requirement in doing it. We actually pay a fee to be into this registry. That fee, Sarah will be happy to know, is going to go away next year. But we still want to have that money for something else. But essentially, with the KDHE and Johnson County EMS system has collaborated with KDHE and receiving a grant that the entire state of Kansas will be able to participate in the CARES registry. So right now, typically about only 25% of emergency entities, but either EMS or fire, participate. But the ones that do participate are typically high performers in this space. Doesn't mean they're perfect, doesn't mean they're doing everything right, but they're at least paying attention to their numbers. So they're typically higher than what normally would be. You don't have to be a high performer to be in, you don't have to be in the CARES registry to be a high performer, but typically you are, because you want to be able to measure against other entities across the United States. And it gives us a really good baseline of where we're at typically. Oops.
Okay, talk about how PulsePoint works, and we have our friends from Douglas County Emergency Communication Center here. Phone rings in dispatch, and dispatcher picks it up and says, "This is a police or fire or medical emergency," and someone says medical, and say it's a cardiac arrest. Those calls are peeled off into a PulsePoint server, and then a ping goes out. Users identified within a quarter-mile radius then receive a notification, and they can choose to go help or not. It's not a requirement when you sign up for PulsePoint. You're saying, I would like notifications, and it's up to you to respond or not. This is a movie that is accessible on PulsePoint's website, but we're not going to be able to play it here. No, that's all right. So when your phone gets a PulsePoint CPR needed alert, it makes a sound that's unusual relative to all the other sounds. I know over time I've come to recognize all the little beeps that my phone makes. This is a sound that makes you look at your phone because you don't hear it very often. You'll see that CPR is needed, and you'll see that you can see where your location is, and you can see where the CPR needed is. If you're responding, you can click that button on the left and say, "I'm responding, guide me in." The blue dot is where the holder of the phone is located. The red heart is where CPR is needed. And you can see a little yellow rectangular shape there. That means there's an AED in that location. So the responder could get that AED and take it with them to the incident. Once you get to the patient, instructions are available. If you don't remember how to do CPR or you're a little amped up, because that's typically a reaction that happens. You can see little pictures on how to do CPR. You see that these instructions are in Spanish. PulsePoint's available in Canadian French, Spanish, English, and Japanese currently. So it is a multilingual app, and I'm sure that they are looking to expand as they have their eyes on Europe a little bit. So as the program began to develop and began to be successful and spread across the country, it began to evolve a little bit. The next evolution that came was what was called Verified Responder Program. This is a program that allows agencies that use PulsePoint to designate folks that they know are responders. In our case, it's our staff here at LDCFM. And those individuals get notification of cardiac arrest events in private locations as well. And the reason why we use verified responders is we know who they are, and we know that they have experience in going into houses that where somebody needs cardiac arrest, and they may or will likely recognize situations where they shouldn't go in, and they're not getting all of the alerts. If in certain cases they wouldn't get it, but if it's a medically related cardiac arrest in a private location, if you're a verified responder, you're going to get that notification. And we do have responders. We do have responders in Douglas County who have gone into private locations. Someone from LDCFM has responded twice in the last year. I responded to a house in my neighborhood. I was there just a little bit after the cruise, but got the notification while I was sitting on my couch. Ran in, changed into some clothes. I think I was wearing my dog pajamas then, and I wanted to wear something reasonable, so I threw on a uniform and went over, but was able to get that notification, get over, and provide some assistance to the crews that were on scene. Crews that have that can show up. You can show your ID on your phone. It says, "I'm a verified responder with LDCFM, and I'm here to help you." And that's really what it's for. When I was working for Spokane Valley, we piloted this project. We were one of 4 locations that piloted the VR Pro aspect. Right after I left, we had our first save. A firefighter from Spokane was sitting at home. He had a grant-funded AED that was at his home with him. He got notification that a neighbor needed CPR, ran over, put the AED on him, had delivered a shock, had brought him back essentially by the time the crews got there. So it was a early win, early success story. Another aspect of PulsePoint that's evolved that I'm a big fan of is what's called Community View. If you sign up for PulsePoint, you can follow the agencies that you want to follow, and you can see what those agencies are doing. So this is a screenshot from last week or 2 weeks ago from here in Lawrence. And you can see that we were on one active call at the time, a medical emergency. And you can also see that that's anonymized. So it's the geolocation is hidden there. If you click on that, you're not going to be taken to a map. There is a map feature we'll talk about. But if you look right below that on fire alarms are public information. That's 2030 Becker Drive. You can click on that and you can see a map of where Becker Drive is at. So that's a way for us to talk to the community about the activities that we're doing. We can tell you that we have a very busy fire department. We're running all over the place. We run a lot of medical incidents, and I can talk all day about how that is. But if I can hold this up and show you, here's all the calls that we ran over the last 24 hours, that's a much better story than I can tell you. These are current Douglas County PulsePoint agencies. So if you want to sign up for the PulsePoint app, you can follow these agencies and you can sign up for notifications. Just because I work for the fire department, I get notified that of certain instances or certain events that we go to. I do follow some of these other agencies, so I know what's going on in those other communities in Douglas County as well. When I lived in Washington State, right before I moved here, I didn't live in the jurisdiction where I worked, but I was a taxpayer where I lived, and I was always curious where my tax dollars were going when I saw the big red fire engine going down the road. So I would pull up PulsePoint, and I'd see that they're going to a medical incident in downtown, and it assuaged a little bit of my curiosity, but also it was good to see what the department was up to. As of the date that this screenshot was taken, these are the people who follow LDCFM. So we have 1,899 followers as of that screenshot, and they are all over the U.S. So those are the folks who've signed up to see what LDCFM is doing. And these are, again, our followers within Douglas County who have these are the ones who have subscribed for CPR alerts that also follow LDCFM. So you can see that they're spread all over the county, and most of them are in Lawrence, but you can see they're kind of all over the place. Another aspect of the program is the PulsePoint AED registry. This allows us to find where AEDs are in the county. They get into the registry. Dispatch has access to that and can say there's a AED nearby. You can see this is the picture of the AED that's right outside the doors here, over by the elevators. The approach that PulsePoint took with the AED registry, again, was to crowdsource this. So if you have the PulsePoint AED app and you see an AED, you can pull up your app, see if that AED is within the program, has been captured yet. If not, you can grab a photo of it, enter a little bit of information, and hit submit, and it'll pop up in the fire departments, the local jurisdictions email and say, hey, there's a new AED alert, take a look at it. Oftentimes we'll send somebody out there to get a picture of it. People are very great about getting pictures of AEDs from 6 inches away or a foot away, but we really want to see that contextual information. If you're looking for an AED in the moment, you want to see it's by the elevators and not that it's a Philips brand and it's where you can read the serial number. So you can see somebody has done this down at Baldwin High School and Baldwin Junior High. And they have, looks like 5 AEDs within the area. And so these have been entered into the system, and if you were to get a CPR alert for that location, you'd know that there's AEDs there. You can see the sticker that we've started to slap on the side of the cabinets just so folks know it's registered already, and they can also get the Pulse Point app from that location. So there's a couple ways to get into Pulse Point. Pulse Point Respond is the original app, and that's the one on the right. If you shoot that QR code or go to that QR code, you can get right to Pulse Point Respond and download that. We encourage folks to do that, sign up for what they're comfortable with. If they're comfortable getting CPR alerts, we do encourage that. Also like them to follow us. So Lawrence Douglas County, Kansas is our name on Pulse Point. They can follow us. If you're interested in the AED app, that's also up there as well. Available to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Chief Llewellyn and Chief Joles. Any questions from you, Commissioner Kelly? Do you mind stopping your share screen, please? Thank you. Commissioner Willie, we're working on getting your face back on the screen for us here in the room, but do you have any questions?
Well, just that I'm excited about this. I did, after both Chief Llewellyn and Chief Joles invited me to look into the opportunity for a ride-along, I did take them up on that on Saturday, and I rode along with 5Z. That's the lingo that I'm getting now. It's Station 5, Shift Z. Ran a lot of medical calls on the engine there and had a really great experience with it. The crew was super to let me pester them with questions, as you know I do. And then they were all talking about Pulse Point and recommending it. And I think there's a lot of excitement in the agency. I've been hearing it from Willow Springs responders also. Both of those agencies are in Pulse Point, as we saw on the video there. So I did finally sign up, and looks like we have 2 medical emergencies and a training going on in Lawrence at the moment. So it's pretty fun to kind of watch and see what's going on in the community. So just thanks for the presentation. I didn't have any specific questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Willie. I am also a user. I'm one of those little yellow people north of the river. And it is a really cool tool. I didn't know about the AED specific one and the ability to like inform the app or inform the jurisdiction about AEDs that are not registered. So that's a really cool feature to learn about. Can you just talk a little bit about what your outreach and public sort of awareness campaign looks like to try and increase that number, Chief Joles, of folks who are participating and might be responding as bystanders?
Yeah, so we've had this program for about 2 years. There's been some things that have been recently in development, and we just are launching in a test environment the ability for our folks that are verified responders to get some call notes, which is helpful because typically, and I don't know why, and Tony, I'm not going to put Tony on the spot or any of the folks, but there's occasionally occasionally these Pulse Point notifications will come prior to the dispatch over the tones. So it's a little bit of an advanced response. And so we have to, I don't know how to say this. When we're on duty, we're living our lives while we're working, right? We're there a third of our lives. So we go to the grocery store, we are out doing inspections, and sometimes we don't have, we've got one person with a radio, maybe somebody's around the corner. So these apps that are allowing us to not be notified earlier are always great, specifically if it's just about the process in which a dispatcher needs to go through to get all these informational points out. So the quicker we know these things, the better. This also gives opportunities for people that are roaming around in the neighborhoods while they're driving to school. If there's an accident or a fire or something, that they can take a different route to school, that they can not be delayed. It helps guide them around that. As far as some campaigns to have better outreach. We're starting that, and we started that this last week here with daily Facebook notifications, and then we're going to try to do some other campaigns. We had our, and I don't know how, if it's our first ever, but we had the open house last year, so we'll definitely push that out this year at the open house, and just some other media opportunities to let people know that this is happening, and we'll have this be an ongoing thing for as long as we can. There's opportunities, obviously, with media. We've talked about some advertisements at the buses. We obviously have some really good sporting events in this town. So there's opportunities. It'd be great. It's one of my goals to be able to say that we attempted to teach 16,300 people at Allen Fieldhouse CPR in one setting. I think the record is 12,000. So we should be able to beat that pretty easily. So there's just a lot of opportunities that will increase not only our delivering the patient to the hospital with pulsatile rhythms, but increase our survivability in the county and the community. And we're just brainstorming. We're just continually doing that. But these last 2 years have been development for us to make sure that what we're pushing out we really understand and that we're using it to the best of our ability.
Helpful, thanks. And thanks for all the examples of ideas you have. Sporting events was something that came to my mind, and just like both for the purpose of being able to teach and educate such a large group of people, but also in a setting that is like exactly a good example of why an app like this could be so critical, and the ability to respond in sort of a dense group setting. So I think that's a great idea. And I'm also just curious if I like that the app gives some pretty good and clear instructions, and sort of, I think, helps alleviate the notion that CPR is a really complicated, difficult, gotta be super trained and experienced to do it thing, which is what I think most people probably assume. So I appreciate that, but I am curious if any of the feedback you've heard so far, or have thought about like the feedback you might get that people are not comfortable knowing how to do CPR, and how can they learn how to do it in a more hands-on setting versus just the instructions that the app gives.
Yeah, so thankfully, on the first part of that, thankfully, our dispatchers are emergency medical dispatchers, and so they coach and they talk the patient's family or the bystanders. They attempt to do that to the best of their ability, and they have to be pretty firm at times, because it's difficult for somebody to want to touch somebody that they're just not familiar with, or they just think that it's kind of an icky deal because there is somebody that is essentially dead. And so it's difficult. And if you're not willing to do that, it makes it even harder. However, there are opportunities to coach those people to go get somebody else a little bit quicker. So there are those barriers, and there are always going to be those barriers. However, these opportunities that we're going to try to take over the next hopefully forever, but in a bigger broad stroke, is teaching people CPR. And that's something that we've certainly not say that we haven't focused on it, but that we've just been lean on being able to get really good larger classes involved in that. So we're something that I just started to pen today is something to Sarah and Craig Owens, is we would like to take, I hate to use the word control, but essentially control over all the AEDs that are not only city-owned but county-owned, and so that we can ensure that they have batteries, fresh pads, that they're in working order. If they're time to be replaced, that we replace them. And we did ask for some budget compensation for the 2024 budget from both sides, and it was granted to be able to have that. And so I just want to be able to have the backing from both the city and the county leaders for us to go in and say, we're not taking it away from you. If it's behind a locked door, what can we do to put it in a public space? And we'll take care of it, because it is a difficult task. But since we've been granted some new personnel within the EMS division with our logistics tech last year, once we get, it's going to be an overwhelming task to be able to get it up and running. But once we get all of these expiration dates and maintenance records and things like that put into PulsePoint, which manages it for us and notifies us, it should be something that's ongoing. And then with the staff that we have, not only in the city, but in the county, if they're doing inspections, that'll be an added task for them to check to find out if somebody's got an AED, and we're just going to be adding and adding. The University of Kansas has, I think, 75 or 95 AEDs on campus that are all registered and on the app. So there's a great bit of opportunity when now that we're going to go 100% live. We should see some really good numbers, and a year from now we'll be able to show a lot of yellow and red.
Cool, thank you for that. And I really appreciate how thoughtful and intentional about sort of thinking through possible barriers, what the public's response is, just how to overcome some of that, thinking about how to organize the registry and upkeep of the AEDs in a more streamlined way. All of that sounds really smart to me, so I just appreciate how much thought you've put into making sure that it's a valuable tool and resource for the community and for you at LDCFM. Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Chief Joel's actually touched on this already, but that idea of trying to roll out training and certification opportunities along with the idea of Pulse Point, because I think the more people realize that they could really be useful, just ordinary citizens, because they could be able to respond, they'd have a way to respond, I think will encourage people to get fully certified. So I'd love to see those two paired and see what your thoughts are for how to make that happen.
Okay, with no further questions right now, we'll open this up for public comment. Any takers in the building? Seeing none, double check for hands online. Okay, I'm getting a no head nod. So we'll close public comment, bring this back for any further comments. And this is not an action item, this is informational purposes only. So any last comments, commissioners? We sort of made our comments during questions time too. So thank you all for being here and for giving us this information. I'm excited to see how it goes in the next year.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Okay, with that, our last regular agenda item for the night is an update on our American Rescue Plan Act funds.
Brooke Sauer is going to cover this item for us, our finance manager.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, commissioners. I am delighted to come before you tonight and provide you with an update for the American Rescue Plan Act funds that were awarded to Douglas County in 2021. Bear with me for just one quick moment while I pull up my presentation. Thank you. So tonight we're going to discuss a few items. The first, I'd like to walk you guys through the expenditures to date for both internal and external projects. Well, darn it. Sorry, guys. Lunan? Yeah. Oh, I don't want to learn more. Okay, we're just going to look at it like this. I apologize for that, commissioners. A lot of the information on these slides, I've got quite a few notes to go through. Oh, darn it. This is really being cranky with me. I'm sorry. So first I want to go through the awarded projects. This is a summary level view of all the projects that were awarded either through an emergency use policy that we enacted in early 2021 when we realized that we were going to get this funding, and then through an external process, an RFP process. So all of the projects are just compiled together in this list. I do want to note that for these external awarded projects, 9 projects have been completed. The expenditures total $5 million for those projects. There are still 5 projects between 60 to 95% completion, and those expenditures total $4.7 million. 4 of those projects are between 0 and 30% complete, and that the expenditures for those total around $218,000. This slide, both of them represent, or I'm sorry, this slide only represents $14.5 million in awarded programs, and there are nearly $10 million in expenditures just right here alone. So that's a pretty big accomplishment. For the next 2 slides, these are our internal projects. They represent $9.2 million in awarded programs. 14 of these projects have been completed to date. Of those 14 projects, $1.9 million in expenditures have been realized for those completed projects. And then 5 projects are between 60 and 90%,
and then 14 projects are between 0 and 59%. Those expenditures total $103,000. There's an additional slide that is continued. We've got quite a few internal projects going. I'm going to blow through the next few slides pretty quickly because those slides are just visualizations of the awarded amount and the expenditures to date. So really what I'm looking for with this visualization is that that orange bar and that blue bar are getting to be the same. So if we've got projects where we've got a really long blue bar and a little tiny orange bar, those are the projects that I'm going to start asking about this year. Because I'm going to get a little bit later in the presentation into some more rules and some more technical stuff that I've lightly touched on, but things are getting a little more serious now that we're getting closer to our deadline. These projects, I'm just going to quickly go through these. I broke them out by award amount to make it easier to look at. If I put them all on one visualization, it gets a little wild. Finally, this final visualization is a percentage complete by project. And I've separated these between internal projects and external projects just so you could get a quick glimpse of where those projects are. And the completion is calculated based on expenditure. So if I have 100% expenditures, it's got a full bar on this graph. Now, we've talked a lot about expenditures, but I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide here because I'm going to bring up a term that I've talked about a couple of times with this group, and the term is obligations. So in November of 2023, the U.S. Treasury issued an additional obligation, IFR. That's an interim final rule. It revised the original definition of obligation. So what that means for us is that a couple things. The term obligation, it just means we've entered into a contract, we're going to buy a good or service, or we've entered into a subaward agreement to grant the funding to an external partner. So when we talk about obligations, all of our external partners that we've awarded grant money to, that obligation requirement is already satisfied. Now, here's the kicker, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. There are certain things that if the way that they've expanded this rule allows us a little bit of flexibility if we go beyond that December 31st, 2024 deadline to obligate our funds. We actually have through December 31st, 2026 to spend those. But all of the contractual obligations have to be in place by December 31st of this year. So we've already met that with our external partners, but I have given them a deadline contractually of December 31st, 2024, because I wanted us to be able to reconvene like we are tonight, and come up with a good game plan if we had partners that weren't able to complete their projects. I do not see that to be the case. And we'll talk a little bit more on some future slides about the ways I've surveyed our external partners. We're also allowed with this expanded rule to replace certain contracts. So if we make an obligation, one of the one that sticks out in my mind right now is land acquisition for open space. That's a really big one. So what this means for us is that we need to be under contract by December 31st of 2024. Now, say we're under contract, but we've not closed on that property, this final rule allows us to cancel that contract and do a new contract. So it gives us a little bit of greater flexibility. So I just thought it would be very important to point out to this body tonight as we start talking more and more in the coming months about obligations and how we move forward. There are a few expanded eligible uses. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but I thought that it would be important for this body to know if in the event that we would need to tap into this as a resource, there is emergency relief for natural disasters. That is something that is now an expanded eligible use. There's some road safety projects that are included in that, and then some community development projects that are now included in that. If you guys have really specific questions about that, I might have to come back because I didn't spend a whole lot of time researching those. In 2022, Douglas County was also the recipient of the Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund. This funding is very, there's not a whole lot of rules around how we spend this money, but it is a part of the American Rescue Act, and it's just, it is to supplement any revenue loss as a result of the pandemic. So what I'm going to ask the commission in a couple of slides from now is how do we allocate that funding, and what's the process for that? And how do we use that to supplement this program if we want to? We might not want to. So moving along now to the project status survey, I reached out to our external grantees in regards to their subawards, just to see the ones that hadn't finished yet or are within the 0 to I think 60% range. And then those that have just, their project isn't closed yet. All of the subrecipients feel that they will be able to exhaust their funding. Some of our subrecipients have experienced some pretty significant delays and challenges related to their projects. Lead times were a really big deal in 2021 and 2022. And then also labor costs and materials, as you guys are well aware, presented a number of challenges for our partners, specifically that we're doing construction projects. But regardless, they feel that they will be able to exhaust all the funding before that deadline. But some of our partners might benefit from having a contract extension through that December 31st, 2026 date, if commission so chooses to do that. So the final slide here, we're going to spend a little bit of time here because I've got some questions for you guys about what the process is moving forward for this funding. So I want to take you guys back to July of 2022. The commission at that time expressed their interest in setting aside a certain percentage of funding to allocate towards internal projects. And I want to say that this is a percentage of the money that was left after we had done some emergency use funding in utilizing that policy. So of that, 11% was left unallocated, unappropriated. And so tonight, I'm asking you, Commission, we've got approximately $865,000 that is still not allocated to a project or program, internal or external. You know, one of we have been approached by a few departments that have expressed a need that is very within the eligibility of this funding. The EOC upgrade project, the labor costs and materials came in significantly higher, so that's about $146,000. We're also needing to replace quite a few tornado sirens, 30 to be exact. If we replace 10 this year and 20 next year, that could cost around $321,000, close to $322,000. And so there are internal projects that are kind of coming up that are clearly eligible for this funding. But I wanted to approach commission tonight. We have a budget revision process. We have a change in scope process. You've seen some of those revisions come through, and we have had a couple partners change their projects. And so my hope tonight is to kind of flesh out a process with you guys about how you would like staff to approach commission for additional projects, or do we want to open this up for our external partners? Perhaps if there are some unrealized needs with the projects that are still in progress. And then do you guys prefer that if we have a subrecipient that can complete their project, but they can't do it before that December 31st, 2024 deadline, if staff would be authorized to extend that contract through that 2026 date to help that agency get their project completed. So with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions about any of the expenditures, programs, project statuses, or process.
Thanks, Brooke, and maybe you could stop sharing. So we
thank
can
you,
see
Sarah.
Commissioner. And I just want to add to Commissioners, I don't think we're necessarily expecting that we're going to completely hammer out the process tonight. I think my hope would be is if you have any initial thoughts and if you want to think about it, then staff can begin to work on this and bring something back to you at a later date. I'd also add that I think we have some work to do with internal projects. So I think there's a couple on that list that priorities may have changed or different things. So we need to also figure that piece out and determine if there's some additional funds there as well. And then obviously, I think there are some considerations with EOCA in result of the conversation that was had earlier today related to the sheriff's annex. So I need a little bit of time to confer with EM and the design team about that as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Brooke. Really appreciate the presentation. It's a lot of information to compile and summarize and aggregate for us, so thank you for that and for bringing some clear questions to us for consideration. I don't have any questions top of mind yet. How about you, Commissioner Kelly? Anything top of mind? Commissioner Willie?
I have one.
Go for it.
So, Brooke, the 865,000 of ARPA funds that are still available or unused, unallocated, is that only the internal projects? And is there a number for the external projects of money that is likely to not be spent?
Yeah, Commissioner Willie, that's a great question. I have only had one partner with a very small award let me know that they might not be able to exhaust their entire award.
An external partner.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's external. Thank you, Sarah. The 865,000 is left, it's just money that was left over, that was left unallocated from the award process that took place in July of 2022. The hope was to come back before this body and decide what to do with that at a later date.
And so I think, yeah, so it was unallocated at the time, and it's part of that 33% that initially the commissioners had designated for internal, but was not allocated to them. And honestly, that is just a determination the commission made at the time. There's no obligation to that in regard to federal rules.
So there's only one external partner that says they're not going to be able to accomplish their project, so probably turning some money back. But it looked like some of those internal projects maybe have been reevaluated. Do we have a dollar figure on which of those, or how many dollars might possibly be turned back from internal projects?
Commissioner Willie, I do not have that. I'm sorry.
I think that's some of the work we're going to do in the next couple months.
Absolutely.
So, thanks, great presentation. I know this has been a huge thing to manage. And Sarah, it seems like what you're asking us is that it would be good for you to go back to look at the internal projects, evaluate the internal projects, and bring to us a recommendation. I'll just start off saying, like, I'm not really interested in another external evaluate. That was a huge lift, and I'm worried about external projects being able to complete an evaluation, to turn in an application. We complete the evaluation and them complete the project in this short amount of time. I would much rather keep it internal. I don't know how other commissioners feel, and we probably need to make public comment before I start doing this part, but that's where my first, is that what you're, I'll make it
Yes.
into a question. Is that what you're asking us, Sarah and Brooke?
Yes, I think that's the kind of feedback I think we're looking for. I would also just say, I think there could be some possible, I don't think staff is at all recommending a new grant process. But you did establish some priorities with existing partners and existing projects when we did this the first time, both for external work and internal work. So I'd like some flexibility to be able to bring back some ideas to you around that in the next couple months.
Yeah, I appreciate that that thought, Commissioner Kelly, and it's sort of my initial inclination too. I will say the 3 new expanded eligible uses just sort of, it made me think if we were to have another iteration of some sort of external, grant review process, that it should certainly be much more narrow for all the reasons, including especially timeline, and perhaps some guidance is just sort of built into these 3 new eligible expanded uses that were not necessarily a consideration for us, for the commission, when we first considered. So that's one thought I had, but I think I am interested. I want to be clear, because I think, when the commission in summer 2022 made those decisions and designated that we wanted a third of the funds to be committed to internal projects, that there was some significant reasons around that and lots of opportunity. And we wanted to be sure that we use those dollars to help invest in what we could. So I am interested in staff coming back with some more understanding of possibly some reevaluated projects and dollars that could be freed up from there, and that alongside an evaluation of what are the, in addition to the tornado sirens and EOC, what are some other projects that are right there? So that will weigh in my decision. Does that end up kind of closing the gap if you come up with an amount of projects internally that we could possibly consider reallocating to? Does it still leave a pretty good chunk of change? And then in which case we might want to reconsider what other uses there are. I did not go do any independent Google researching yet about this LATCF piece of it. I was just finding myself confused by it, probably by the name of it. And just trying to understand, you said that it's pretty open-ended and flexible.
It is.
And so I guess maybe there is no answer to my question, which is, do we have any sort of definition of like what some intention around those funds are? Because I don't even know where to start.
Yes.
Sorry, I
So
went away from the
my-
microphone.
Yeah, that's a great question. This particular source of funding was provided to counties that have federal land inside the county. We've got approximately 32 square miles of that federal land out at Clinton Lake. And
Haskell.
yes. And so because of that, this money was allocated to those jurisdictions to offset any loss because there's no tax base there. So that is my understanding of this particular stream of funding, and it was just used to supplement just general government operations. There's just a couple rules. You can't use it to pay for lobbying. And then there's one other one that I cannot remember, but it's very flexible.
Okay, so I guess that begs the question for me. I don't want to put too many processes in place, right? And to overcomplicate it, but also it seems like it's a different pool of money and therefore might need or require its own process. Does that feel true to you? Or do you think that it can kind of track a similar process for how we might reallocate some available funds?
Yeah, my understanding is that we can treat the money as county money at this point, with the exception of those two provisions that require us from spending that money on those certain things.
Got it. And the slide doesn't mention anything about deadlines, but is it the same? No?
No, we have this money and it just needs to be allocated to something.
So it doesn't need to be obligated by December 31st, like all these other ARPA funds that we need to be clear about.
Let's hear it for federal funds that are not attached to strict regulations with deadlines. Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. So Brooke, it says process for future allocations. Are there expected to be future allocations, or is this a one-time thing?
Yeah, this would be, well, that's a great question. This could be a multi, if I find out in November that we've got a project where we might have to reallocate $180,000, you're going to see me the next week. So, that's hard to answer.
But that was really about the general conversation about ARPA, not the LACT thing,
Oh,
right? I mean,
I think Commissioner Willie was just asking about, is that right, Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, the LATCF, is that a one-time $100,000, or is that likely to
yes.
be repeated?
Oh, Commissioner Willie, I'm so sorry. No, this is one time. We've already gotten it. It's in the bank and it's just waiting to be allocated to something.
But your presentation said we may receive more if other counties turn it down.
Yes, but the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim
It's
to
pretty
nil.
slim, yeah.
And I think in Kansas, I think I had seen something one time in a webinar and I was like, no, we're probably not going to get any more. So
I would say with that one, I'd like to, I think we can bring it back in this process. I would like to not necessarily entertain an entire grant process for $100,000, but I do think that we have some existing projects that were funded through our ARPA projects. I'm thinking specifically about our open space project that are specifically aligned with our federal lands that might be a great project to align this work with. And so I like, to me, that was the first thing that came to mind, was how do we align it with that work? And given that we have some flexibility on the timing, that could be really great. So if the commissioner is supportive of it, I'd like to include that in what we bring back to you as, and we'd make sure to note where those funds come from, but bring it back to you in a recommendation for how to proceed with the remainder of the funds.
Okay, any other questions from commissioners for staff at this point? Commissioner Willie, I see you unmuted.
Is it okay to change topics within this a little bit?
Sure.
So Brooke, I have a question about, I'm thinking specifically of the elevator at the Watkins, which has come back to us a couple of times for a supplemental input there because the cost had increased. Do we, if we have additional dollars available and we have external projects that are already funded, is there an interest among the commission of if there are projects that were not able to meet the full scope of their request because of other kinds of conditions, are we open to that, or is that door closed and we're only going to look at internal projects?
So commissioners, as staff, I would just make the recommendation that if we do any sort of external projects, that we only open it up to the folks who have already been awarded, so that there is not a new subrecipient monitoring relationship. And so I just wanted to throw that out there before you provide your thoughts. It's a big administrative pull.
Yes, I totally agree. I don't want to add anything to. I'm curious because we've had that relationship twice with the Watkins because they had a request and we met that request. Are there others that are like that? And are we entertaining other requests like that, or is that door closed for helping to fulfill the full obligation of the project if the dollars were insufficient.
So I will let the commission know that there are a handful of projects that will not be fully completed because they have exhausted or they will have exhausted their funding. And then Watkins Museum has asked in a supplemental budget revision request additional funding for the project to get the elevator completed. You've seen those on the consent agenda, and staff can continue with that process if commission desires.
I'd also say I feel like somewhat of an obligation to, I think there's a lot of folks that are existing subrecipients that if we went back to them and said, there's additional funds available, what could you do with it? I think there are folks that didn't ask because they knew their funds were exhausted. So I just want to hold open that possibility that they haven't come back to us because they weren't going to ask.
I think that's very possibly true. And I think maybe there's a distinction between this was the scope of the project, and because of conditions, the funds did not kind of meet that full project, versus, hey, if you've got money, we could do something else in addition.
Great.
That to me is a different request.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah.
So, Brooke, you said that you've had a handful of organizations, external partners, that said they may be in that situation. Do you have a ballpark dollar figure what that is, or is that not even fair yet if we haven't asked the others?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I do not have a ballpark figure. When I reached out to our partners that have not completed their projects yet, I was not very specific. I just inquired if they would be able to exhaust their funds, if they would be able to complete their projects on time. And there was one other question and I asked them to describe the problems that any challenges that they've been experiencing during this process. And a lot of it related back to labor costs, materials, and lead times for contracting. Did that answer your question, Commissioner Willie?
Yeah, I know a dollar amount's going to be hard to come up with, but I guess maybe that's something that we could see before we would make some larger decisions about unallocated funds. And maybe it's not, maybe those need to stay with internal projects and we just don't touch that. I guess after we have public comment, I'll poke my fellow commissioners and see where they are with that.
I was just going to suggest that we should continue that conversation after public comment. That's a good question. Any other questions for staff? All right, with that, we'll see. Anybody here want to provide public comment on this item? All right, seeing no takers. Anybody online? Okay, we'll close public comment, bring it back for further discussion. Yeah. I appreciate that question, Commissioner Willie, and I appreciate the something I thought about before tonight's meeting, like that it would be helpful to understand who of our external projects or partners specifically have been unable to or believe that it is going to be impossible for them to complete a project because the cost of the project has exceeded the amount that we allocated. I don't know how easy that information is to discern for staff, to be honest. So that's something I thought through too. Like, I don't want to create too much additional work. And that also does feel sort of like an important piece of information. I think mostly because, well, it's just part of the equation is, I still feel pretty committed to that 33% that we wanted to dedicate to internal projects. If other internal projects exist, needs have come to the surface since we talked about this and allocated funds nearly 2 years ago, that's what I'm most interested in hearing and knowing and being clear about. Where can we invest these dollars to really help build up some infrastructure, or replace things that we need to, et cetera. So that's personally for me, my first priority, but I recognize the possibility that there could still be a chunk, maybe it won't be 11%, but a chunk of that 33% that is left unallocated And I would trust that like, if staff hasn't identified other projects that are necessarily a need that rise to the level or would be able to work within the timeline and all of that, then what is really the question that I think we have to answer and that I don't have a very clear thought on yet, because I am reluctant to just open up a whole new process, even to the subrecipients and external partners that are already receiving funds, right? That in and of itself, that keeps a lid on it a little bit, but it's still a lot more work than it would be to necessarily manage those funds internally. So yeah, those are my thoughts for the moment.
I mean, I would say, commissioners, I want to remind you that the ability for agencies to spend this internally is extremely broad. You just heard a presentation about a $74 million courthouse. These funds could be used, I mean, I'm just saying, you know, I mean, it is that broad, and particularly with the sheriff's office expansion. I mean, with the rebuilding of an EOC and an ECC, there's going to be substantial costs associated with that. To say, if you tell me to spend it internally, I can find a way to spend it.
That was kind of my thought. I was just throwing this out there for a conversation. Like if buckets have already been established, the internal bucket and the external bucket, are those worth preserving as they are, which I think they very well might be. And I wasn't here for that process, so I also don't want to be, forceful in that. But the reason I was asking about the Watkins project, and I think we've had one other that have come back for a supplemental addition to finish a project, is where did that money come from? Did it come from a bucket of unallocated funds for external partners, or did it come from taking from some of these internal projects, because that's where the only unallocated funds were? So have we already breached those buckets, I guess, is the question I have.
Yeah, that's a great question, Commissioner Willie. What I have done when I've brought the board these revisions is I am removing it from the the unallocated, and then I'm adding it back in. So I don't know if you guys remember or not, but Lawrence Douglas County Public Health had a $264,000 project. They only spent $80,000, and it was for test kits. Test kits were expiring. And so they said, we're not gonna get any more test kits. So the rest of that money got put back in unallocated, because that's just been my bucket that I've been able to take from and give back to and then take from again. So in all reality, initially that bucket was only $765,000. Now it's $865,000, because we've had some of that back and forth. So that's a great question, and that's how I've been handling that process. Since we started doing the budget revision forms, it's been recommended to this body that that money be removed from that program to supplement the program in the revision.
So can I ask for that clarification that, so when Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, which we were processing as an external partner, turned money back, it then went into the bucket for unallocated funds for internal projects. So then when we've had supplemental requests for external partners, we've then taken it back out of the internal project unallocated. So we've already kind of swapped in both directions. Is that right?
Yeah, and maybe instead of us talking about like buckets of things, we can get you some better math on that, Commissioner Willie, and bring it back to you at a later date, which shows like what our current allocation percentages are and how those have changed over time. So I'd rather have Brooke time to do that math than doing it on the fly.
So I'm just going to weigh in and say, like, when you look at the list of external partners, like maybe there are some external partners that couldn't quite complete, they didn't have enough money to complete their project, but I get a little nervous about scope creep, as we ask for them to come back to us and tell us, what did you want? I mean, part of what we asked them to do is put together a proposal, and they've had all this time. And so I think we have lots of needs internally that then would open up dollars if a community partner came to us needing one-time funds, because this is a one-time fund. And so if we take care of some things internally, we have a little more control over that. Not that our subrecipients haven't been really great and responsive, but I think that would then free up other one-time dollars that we could use if staff came to us and said, I'm just gonna, since we're talking about Lawrence Douglas County Public Health and they've spent their whole allocation, they don't need any more. But let's say Lawrence Douglas County Public Health came to us and said, look, we need another $10,000 to get to the finish line of this project. We could use our own one-time funds for that wouldn't be held to the expectations of the ARPA funds. So I guess that's the way that I'm leaning, commissioners.
I like that, Commissioner Kelly, and I appreciate you illustrating that there, certainly we've had other examples of being asked for one-time funds for things not specific to these projects, but I do like that idea, and I certainly appreciate, I think, Sarah, yes, certainly we could give staff direction for spending the rest of the allocated funds internally, and that it shouldn't be hard to do. So thank you for the reminder that it is broad in definition and how we can apply it, and that we can probably meet some needs. So I think it would be helpful to me to have a clearer understanding of any of those internal projects that haven't really spent any money yet or have spent very little money, why that is, and is it just because they've pivoted to some other priority and we need to update that information to the commission and update numbers potentially, or does the need just not exist so we need to look elsewhere in other departments? Go ahead, sorry, I muted myself when I tried to address you.
I wanted to kind of give full disclosure that I serve on a board that put in an ARPA request. I was not on the commission at that time. And they are likely in need of additional funding to fulfill the original scope of the project. I have not been involved with any vote on that board about that, and I would likely not be involved in any vote about that on our board either, just to kind of double clarify that. But I wanted to still be part of the overall discussion about internal and external projects. And that's why I was curious about, is there kind of a set division, in which case we wouldn't want to necessarily move past that division, like the buckets that Sarah didn't want me to talk about. So, if there's a bucket for internal, a bucket for external, like I think that feels like a pretty solid place to not steal from one for the other, but it seems we already have. And so that kind of muddied the waters a little bit for me too. So let me know what part of the conversation you're comfortable with me being a part of and where you're not.
I think that's helpful direction. I think we can give commissioners a little better numbers on the external returned funds and knowing what that is, and then our internal projects with some ideas on how, what the status, because we have some research to do there on their status. And I think that, Brooke, right, I feel pretty good that gives us some direction.
Absolutely.
That we could bring back to you, not immediately, but take some time to do that research and bring it back to you.
Thank you. Think that's great to have more numbers to it. There was one more point, Brooke, that you asked about, and that was whether or not we should extend the date for external agencies if they can't complete their project on time. And I was curious what your sense was for that. I mean, I don't know if we wanted to say case by case basis, but are they going to finish it soon after the 2024 deadline, or have they not started yet? Like, where's the threshold for that conversation?
Certainly. We do have maybe 3 partners that have struggled with permitting or applications. Things have just been held up, general contractors. It's not that they haven't started the project, it's that they have experienced some pretty significant barriers to complete their project. I know one of the ones that was widely covered was the Ballard Center. They had some real significant delays in their construction project project because of some permitting and some I don't know if it's called zoning issues with their existing structure. So, you know, it's not that they didn't get right on it. They just really had a hard time getting some of the things that they needed in place. And so, you know, that partner may benefit from that contract extension if they can't complete their project by the end of the year. So that's just one example, because really when we talk about our external partners, most of them are done. You know, there really is only just a handful of folks that are left. So it's really exciting, in all honesty.
To give you some guidance, we don't know the weeds of the projects that we're not in those weeds. And so if you came to us saying, I think these 3 projects need a deadline of December 31st, because that would get them done, and that these 3 projects we need to give an extension to, personally, I would trust that recommendation.
I would value, sorry, go ahead.
You go, Commissioner Willie.
So I would value that input very much from Brooke, who knows these partners really well. I guess my only thought is if we allocate those funds and that timeline gets extended and then a project falls through and doesn't happen, we've lost that money, right? That we can't rewrite any of those contracts after the fact. So that's the only that's why I think we'd need a lot of guidance from you to say, these are a pretty sure bet. And this one, we may have to kind of hold those funds, you know, go ahead and get those funds spent, and they could come back to us in a budget request later.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's interested in running this up to the last minute. So, but there is some wiggle room between where we are at 12/31 of 24 and the absolute last minute. So I appreciate that. And I think we can get you some more information on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would just add or echo that staff input and discretion about that is sort of most valuable to me in that decision. It's good to hear that it is possible to have the obligation can be met by December 31st in a contract, but if something fundamentally changes about the project that requires a new contract, that as long as one was entered by December 31st of this year, it can be, well, not just modified, you said it can be like a withdrawn contract and a new contract can be executed, right?
Absolutely. So I want to be clear that the scope can't change. So if we have a construction project and there's a change order, that is not eligible now. That is the responsibility of that recipient of the fund. So it is very specific contractually, you know, as we talk about obligations. And with the expanded interim final rule, there is a provision of that rule that allows us to cancel contracts in certain situations after that deadline. There's a number, well, in fact, the 3 ways you can do that: you can terminate a contract or a subaward because of the contractor or subrecipient default. You can cancel the contract if the contractor or subrecipient mutually agrees to terminate the contract or subaward for convenience. The recipient terminates the contract or subaward for convenience if the contract or subaward was not properly awarded. So if we had the inappropriate authority awarding the project, or something was wrong with the contract, we could cancel the contract in those 3 instances only. So we do have a little bit of protection if we extend that contract, you know, especially if it was entered into in good faith.
To Commissioner Willie's question, like if they didn't get spent in an extended contract or a contract that's obligated by December 31st, must be spent by December 31st, 2026, is that right, Brooke?
Correct.
That if they weren't spent, we would be forfeiting them.
Yes, that is correct.
Just wanted to be clear about
Yes.
that. Okay. Which is, you know, obviously an important piece of information and part of the risk calculation of whether or not staff recommends, based on all the details that you're aware of, how viable that project is and likely it is to spend down those dollars. So I think it's an important option and flexibility to have on the table and to allow to be utilized, but maybe sparingly and with plenty of discretion is my perspective about that. And I agree that, I mean, I get a little bit of clarity on this random $100,000 the federal government threw our way. And that being, decided with the decisions about the unallocated funds makes sense to me. And I think maybe I'll just get on board with the fact that that's super open-ended and I don't have to think about a new way to frame it and specifications for how we can or can't spend it. But that's weird. Good to know. This is an item that doesn't have any action, so there's no vote to take, but I want to make sure that staff feel like you've gotten feedback from us that help answer all the questions you came to us with tonight. I'm getting some affirmative head nods. Commissioner Willie, do you have any final thoughts on this topic for the evening?
Nope, I'm excited to hear what kind of data Brooke comes back with and recommendations.
Yes, me too. Anything else from you, Commissioner Kelly? Great. Thank you, Brooke. And also, I will say I'm hopeful that once external partners and internal partners, I think we tend to hear about internal stuff sort of as things are happening a lot, but that once people are getting past the finish line or the external partners who have gotten to project completions, I'm excited to hear some stories about that and hope they know that we are here to receive those stories if they want to come tell us what that has done for their organization or the people they serve.
Good to know. Thank you, commissioners.
Thanks, Brooke. Have a good rest of your night.
You too.
Okay, that concludes our regular agenda for the night. Move on to appointments, which I don't think we have any.
I do.
Oh, okay. Go
I'd like
ahead.
to reappoint Stephanie Davis for the First District Judicial Nominating Committee.
Yes, thank you for staying on top of that, Commissioner Kelly. I appreciate it. It kind of got lost in my shuffle. I'm happy to second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thanks. Anybody else for this evening? Sarah, do you have anybody to tell us about? Okay. Then next is our commissioner and/or administrator miscellaneous. We'll start with your memo, Sarah.
Thanks, commissioners. My memo's attached, lots of dates, updated legislative report from Little Government Relations, and just a reminder that we do not have a work session next week. Thank you.
Any miscellaneous items from commissioners?
Commissioner Willie, are you going to the State of the City as well? I know that's on next week, right?
I don't have it on my calendar at the moment. What was I think maybe I had a conflict. Is it on our
Okay.
schedule here?
Just making sure that we didn't have two commissioners there.
When is it?
Oh, boy.
The 27th.
Yeah.
Of
I don't-
February.
I will not. I will not
Okay.
be there.
Cool.
And I wanted to report that I will not be able to make the BIPOC Entrepreneurs Summit at Haskell tomorrow. Commissioner Reed, I believe you were there today, and I had wanted to be there, and now I'm here instead. So I won't be able to make that after all, which is too bad. And
That's right,
another
so
item that Sarah and I had a conversation with some of the members of Lawrence Douglas County Public Health, including Vicki Colley-Akers, who's their data analyst, and about some of the public health conversations that were coming up around wind and solar that felt like things that maybe should be evaluated by people with expertise and time to dig into the data and see what was going on and give us some feedback on those. So Sarah, I believe you've heard back from her with some information.
Yes, I've had some conversations with Vicki, and she has prepared some information together. Maybe what would work best is if I include that in next week's memo for commissioners to review, and then we can make a decision if we want to have it on a specific agenda for Vicki to explain in more detail. Would that be a reasonable start?
Yeah, I would like a chance for us all to look at it and have that available to the public and have a conversation and see if more questions are needed.
That's great. I can put that on next week's memo and we can make it and discuss it further.
Great, that sounds like a good plan. Thanks, Commissioner William. Yeah, I did get to attend part of today's first day event at the Haskell BIPOC Entrepreneurial Summit. Jill Jolliker, Assistant County Administrator, was also there. I think attended last year too, right, Jill? So yeah, I didn't get to attend any of the breakout sessions, but got to hear some of the keynote speakers and presentations, and it was great. I'm hopeful that that event just continues to grow and that the word gets out to folks in our community who are thinking about, already have, or interested in expanding their business and how to come together in community on Haskell's campus. So I won't be able to make it tomorrow, but yeah, excited to hear how it goes after the fact. And then I also just wanted to share with commissioners that I got to be a judge again for the Youth Entrepreneurship Challenge last Friday. And it was super fun. I think it's my third year now. And the numbers have been a little low, participation, the after effects of COVID, but we had a really great turnout this year and had 9 different student business ideas, and they were solid. It was hard to judge. It was really hard to judge. There were some very close numbers. So I'm excited about that energy. There were some really cool ideas, lots of community focused and social entrepreneurship ideas, which was cool. And I think probably half of them are students in our community. I think the youngest one was 8th grade, so 8th to 12th grade, who already own their own businesses, which also just kind of blows my mind and really impresses me and makes me wondering what I was doing in high school. Not coming up with business plans. Some of them had financial sheets from the bank, and it was just really impressive and an exciting event that I have loved being a part of, and love that Douglas County throws so much support behind. And big shout out to you, Jill, for doing all the logistical work and coordination of that. And herding a bunch of people into lots of different sort of makeshift spaces out at Peasley Tech that is a great spot for us. And yeah, it was a really cool event, and I'm excited to see what next year's looks like, and maybe we'll have double-digit numbers of entries, and maybe we'll have more sponsors with more prize money, and that would be amazing. So anyway, that's my happy update for the week. Anything else?
I'm so glad you were there. I think it's a great program, and I'm glad that you were there to support it, and about the youth entrepreneurs, and also with the Haskell Entrepreneurs Summit. Do you think, is that going to be an annual event, and is that tied to their Small Business Development Center?
It is an annual event. This was their second annual event, and I think now that the Small Business Center is opening there, and they've got some degree programs that they're implementing this school year, that I fully expect it to continue to go on. So I just hope it'll get more and more notice and a lot more participation.
Good. I did have a good first meeting with Haskell President Arpin and Steve Cadu, who was the one who put that meeting together. And it was just a good first point of contact with the new president. And he gave me some other kind of names of ways to connect, especially as we kind of move into a discussion for open space about Wakarusa Valley especially. But it was just a nice conversation, and I hope we'll have more to go after that.
Great. Okay, I have nothing else. We are adjourned. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye, Commissioner Lee.